The outer boundary of the Velaran expanse did not feel like space. It felt like absence. No star clusters burned brightly there. No trade routes crossed its empty stretch. Even the background radiation was lower, thinner, as if the universe itself had grown quiet in that region. It was a kind of place civilizations marked on their maps and then ignored, and that was exactly why the Sci-fi Empire claimed it. For over 300 cycles, the expanse had belonged to them, not because it was valuable, but because it was uncontested. Their fleets patrolled the borders in slow, predictable patterns. Their mining stations clung to lifeless rocks, extracting resources no one else bothered to claim. Nothing challenged them here. Nothing ever had. Commander Retis stood at the center of the command bridge aboard the flagship Caleron, his posture straight, unmoving. Before him, a wide viewing pane stretched across the wall, revealing a sea of distant stars, cold, scattered, indifferent. Routine had become a kind of comfort. Every patrol identical, every scan empty, every report uneventful. Predictability meant control, and control meant power. Behind him, the bridge crew worked in quiet efficiency. Data streamed flickered across holographic displays. Status updates flowed between stations. No urgency, no tension, just order. Long-range scans remained clear, one officer reported. As expected, Retis replied calmly. Another cycle, another empty watch. Somewhere deep in the expanse, automated defense fleets drifted in formation, their metallic hulls reflecting faint starlight. Weapons were active. Shields were ready, not because they were needed, but because they always were. The Sci-fi did not relax their guard, even when there was nothing to guard against. Retis allowed himself a slow breath. There was a time, long ago, when unknown signals meant danger, when unexplored space meant risk, when the edges of mapped territory held uncertainty. But those days had passed. Now, the unknown had been catalogued, measured, understood. There were no surprises left. At least, that's what everyone believed. A faint shift in the atmosphere of the bridge broke the silence. Subtle, almost nothing. One of the junior sensor officers straightened slightly in his seat. His hands paused above the console. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, Commander, Retis didn't turn immediately. Yes. The hesitation in the officer's voice was small, but noticeable. I'm detecting something. That was enough to change the air in the room. Not panic, not alarm, just attention. Retis slowly turned his head. Clarify. The officer adjusted the scanning interface, expanding the detection grid outward. It's faint, he said carefully. Long range, beyond standard patrol radays. Source. Unknown. That word did not belong here. Retis stepped forward, his gaze narrowing slightly. Unknown is not a classification, he said. Refine the data. The officer swallowed, fingers moving quickly across the controls. I am attempting to isolate it, Commander, but there is no corresponding mass, no energy signature, no known signal type. The bridge grew quieter. Even the background hum of systems seemed softer now. Repeat that, Retis said. There is no identifiable origin, the officer replied. It's just there. Just there. That made no sense. Everything had a source. Everything followed rules, especially in a region like this. Retis studied the display as faint lines of data flickered into view. Coordinates stretched outward, far beyond map space, beyond mining zones, beyond patrol routes, beyond anything that mattered. That region is empty, he said. Yes, Commander, the officer replied. A pause. Then, quieter. That's why this is unusual. Silence settled over the bridge again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one had weight. Retis folded his hands behind his back once more, staring at the distant stars beyond the viewing glass. For the first time in many cycles, something had changed. He didn't feel fear. Not yet, but something else had replaced the comfort of routine. A small fracture in certainty. A single question where there had been none. What kind of signal? He asked. The officer hesitated again. I don't know. Another pause. Then, it doesn't match anything in our database. Retis exhaled slowly. Unknown signal. Unknown origin. From a region that should have been empty. The expanse had always been silent, always predictable, always controlled. And now, there was something out there, not moving, not speaking clearly, not explaining itself. Just present. Retis kept his eyes on the stars. Keep tracking it, he said quietly. Yes, Commander. No alarm sounded. No weapons activated. No emergency protocols engaged. But the bridge had changed. The stillness was gone. In its place was attention. And somewhere beyond the edge of everything they knew, something had just made itself known. The bridge of the Caleron did not return to normal. It couldn't. Something subtle had shifted. The quiet was still there, but now it felt watched. Commander Retis remained standing at the forward deck, his gaze fixed not on the stars, but on the data unfolding across the central display. Update, he said. The sensor officer didn't look away from his console. The signal is stabilizing, Commander. Define stabilizing. It's consistent now. No fluctuation. No distortion. As if it was always there and we're only just now detecting it. Retis frowned slightly. Signals degraded over distance. They scattered. They weakened. They did not stabilize. Range. Beyond mapped space. Deep expanse. Exact distance unclear. There's no measurable origin point. No origin. Yes, Commander. That made no sense. Everything originated from somewhere. Even chaos had a source. Put it on audio. The officer hesitated for half a second, then complied. A low sound rolled across the bridge. Not sharp, not chaotic. Just a single, deep pulse. It lingered for a moment, then faded. Silence followed. No static. No interference. Just absence. Several officers exchanged glances. That's it, one of them muttered. The sensor officer shook his head slowly. Wait! 3 seconds passed. 4, 5. The pulse returned. Exactly the same. Same tone. Same depth. Same duration. Then silence again. Retis felt something tighten in his chest. Interval. 30 seconds, the officer replied. Precise. Variation. None. The next pulse echoed. Identical. Perfectly repeated. Like a machine that didn't drift. Like a system that didn't fail. Is it a beacon? Another officer asked. Retis didn't answer. Beacons called for help. This didn't feel like help. Run decryption. He ordered, already attempting. Commander. Lines of data streamed across the display. Waveforms. Frequencies. Mathematical breakdowns. The communications team worked quickly, isolating patterns. Stripping noise, though there was almost none to remove. That's strange, one technician whispered. What is? Retis asked. There's no encryption layering. No complexity. It's simple. Again that word. Simple. Retis stepped closer. Explain. It's structured, the technician continued. Deliberate, but not advanced encryption. Almost like... He hesitated. Like what? Like it's meant to be understood. Silence followed. Another pulse filled the air. Deep, steady, unchanging. Retis listened to it carefully this time. There was no urgency in it. No distortion. No emotion. It didn't sound like fear. It didn't sound like aggression. It sounded certain. Track it. Retis said, We're trying, Commander. The display shifted. Vectors extended outward into the void. Scanning algorithms recalculated. Then, a faint return appeared, barely visible. Commander, the sensor officer whispered. Retis leaned forward slightly. What is it? I'm picking up a mass reading. How large? The officer didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the filters, zoomed the scan, ran it again. I need confirmation. Speak. The officer swallowed. It's big. That is not a measurement. Larger than a carrier group. That made several officers look up. Impossible, someone said quietly. The sensor officer shook his head. I thought so too. The display sharpened. The faint shape became slightly clearer, still distant, still undefined, but unmistakably present. It wasn't drifting. It wasn't broken. It was moving, slowly, directly, toward them. Speed? Retters asked. Low, the officer replied. Very low. Energy output? Minimal. That didn't align. Object that large required power. Movement required power. But this was controlled, deliberate, almost restrained. Another pulse echoed across the bridge. Retters didn't look at the display this time. He listened. 30 seconds. Perfect timing. Perfect repetition. No variation. No deviation. Is it changing? He asked. The sensor officer checked. A pause. Then, yes. Every eye turned toward him. Explain. The signal strength is increasing slightly. Why? The officer looked at the data, then back at Retters. Because it's getting closer. Silence. No one spoke. No one moved. The realization settled slowly, like cold settling into bone. The signal hadn't appeared suddenly. It had always been there. They were only hearing it now, because it had entered their range. Retters felt that same subtle shift again, that fracture in certainty. This was not random. This was not accidental. Whatever was out there, it had been moving toward them for a long time, unseen, unnoticed, until now. Time to border. Retters asked quietly. The sensor officer ran the calculation. 5 hours. 5 hours. For something that size. That was slow. Too slow. It wasn't rushing. It wasn't hiding. It wasn't reacting. It was simply arriving. Another pulse filled the bridge. Deep, calm, unchanged. Retters stared at the distant stars beyond the viewing glass. For 300 cycles, nothing had come from that direction. Nothing had challenged them. Nothing had even approached. And now, something was, not with speed, not with force, but with certainty. Continue tracking, he said. Yes, Commander. No alarms were triggered. No weapons charged. Not yet. But the bridge no longer felt like a place of control. It felt like a place waiting for something inevitable. And out there, beyond the edge of everything they understood, the signal continued. Steady, precise, unstoppable. The signal did not stop. It did not change. It did not hesitate. Every 30 seconds, it returned. Pulse, silence, pulse, silence, like a heartbeat that did not belong to any living thing. Commander Retters stood motionless, listening. At first, it had seemed like noise, then a signal. Now, it felt like intent. Status, he said quietly. The communications officer responded without looking up. We've isolated the waveform completely. No interference. No distortion across bands. Translation. In progress. How long? A pause. It should not be taking this long. Retters turned slightly. Explain. The officer adjusted the projection, expanding layers of data across the central display. It's not encrypted in any conventional sense, he said. There's no shifting key, no complexity curve, no defensive scrambling. Then why are we not reading it? Because he hesitated. It's too clean. Silence followed. Define clean. It's structured in a way that removes ambiguity. There are no redundant markers, no noise padding, no cultural encoding. Another pulse echoed. The officer continued, quieter now. It's like the sender didn't want it misunderstood. That sentence settled heavily across the bridge. Retters stepped forward again. Show me. The waveform expanded. Each pulse broke down into segments. Repeating segments. Perfectly aligned. Mathematical. Simple. Pattern confirmed. Another technician said. We are seeing consistent binary grouping. Binary, someone repeated. Yes. That made several officers exchange uneasy looks. Binary was primitive. It was universal. It was intentional. Begin conversion. Retters ordered. The display shifted again. Raw signal became symbols. Symbols began aligning. Rows forming. Then stabilizing. The room grew quieter with each passing second. Another pulse. The same structure. The same pattern. Reinforcing the translation. "It's repeating," the communications officer whispered. Rethus's voice was steady. "What is repeating?" The officer didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the filter again, cross-referenced the data, ran it through 3 separate translation models. All returned the same result. His hand slowed, then stopped. "It's a phrase." No one moved. "Display it." The main screen flickered. For a brief moment, nothing. Then, text formed. Clear, uncomplicated, impossible to misinterpret. Human vessel inbound. Silence. Complete. Total. Even the low hum of the ship system seemed distant. No one spoke. No one questioned it, because everyone understood what they were looking at. Rethis stared at the words. Human. Not unknown. Not unidentified. Not classified. Named. Deliberately. Confirmed translation, he said. The officer swallowed. Confirmed. Run alternate models. Already did. All outputs match. Another pulse echoed across the bridge, and with it, the same phrase reappeared. Unchanged. Human vessel inbound. Again, and again, and again. Not faster, not louder, just certain. One of the younger officers shifted uneasily. Why announce themselves? He asked quietly. No one answered, because the question had no comfortable answer. Rethus's mind moved quickly. Humans. They had not been seen in this region for decades. No expansion, no patrols, no signals, nothing. They had stayed within their territory, silent, contained, until now. Update the trajectory. Rethis ordered. The sensor officer complied immediately. Vector lines stretched across the display, from deep expanse, directly toward the Velaran system. No deviation, no hesitation. Still no escort vessels. Rethis asked. None detected. No secondary signals. None. Just one. One signal. One object. One message. Another pulse. Human vessel inbound. The repetition was no longer informational. It was presence, a declaration that did not require response. It's not a warning, the intelligence officer said slowly. Rethis glanced at him. Explain. If it were a warning, it would include conditions, threats, demands. Another pulse. The words appeared again. Unchanged. No escalation. The officer continued. No variation in tone. No additional data. Then what is it? Someone asked. Rethis answered quietly. A statement. Silence followed, because that was worse. Warnings could be negotiated. Threats could be countered. Statements were already decided. Rethis looked back at the display, at the words that did not change, at the signal that did not bend, at the object that continued to approach. Slow, steady, unstoppable. For the first time since the signal appeared, the question was no longer what is it? Now it was, why is it coming? And more importantly, what happens when it arrives? Another pulse echoed through the bridge. Deep, calm, certain. Human vessel inbound. And this time, it no longer felt like a discovery. It felt like inevitability. No one spoke after the translation appeared. No one needed to. The words remained on the main display. Human vessel inbound. Simple, clear, unavoidable. Commander Rethis did not move for several seconds. His eyes remained fixed on the text, but his mind was no longer on the bridge. It had gone somewhere else. Somewhere older. Somewhere buried. Commander, the tactical officer said carefully, should we alert Central Command? Rethis didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked, do we have confirmation on the classification? The sensor officer responded quickly, almost too quickly. Mass readings continue to increase as it approaches. Structural density suggests heavy armor layering. Energy signature remains low, but stable. Rethus's voice lowered slightly. Does it match anything in archive threat profiles? A pause. Then, yes. That single word changed the atmosphere of the entire bridge. Display comparison. The screen shifted. The incoming object remained on one side, a faint but growing shape. On the other side, an archived image appeared, older, grainy, recovered from battle records decades past. A massive vessel, layered plating, recessed weapon arrays, engine clusters positioned deep within armored shielding. The resemblance was not perfect, but it was close enough. Too close. Designation. Retiz asked. The intelligence officer answered this time. Human capital class warship. Another pause. Then, quieter. Dreadnought configuration. The word landed heavily. Not loudly, not dramatically, just heavily. Several officers shifted where they stood. One of them exhaled slowly. I thought those were restricted to core human space, he said. So did we all, another replied. Retiz finally stepped forward again. How many confirmed sightings? He asked. The intelligence officer checked the archive logs. Very few. How many engagements? Fewer. And outcomes? The officer didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. Retiz already knew. But he asked anyway. Report. No confirmed victories against a human dreadnought. Silence. Cold. Complete. The bridge suddenly felt smaller. Not physically, but mentally. As if something vast had entered the system, and everything else had shrunk in comparison. Another pulse echoed. The words returned. Human vessel inbound. But now, they meant something different. Before, it had been unknown. Now, it had context. And that context carried weight. Bring up historical engagement files. Retiz ordered. The display obeyed. Fragments of old war footage filled the screen. Broken transmissions. Combat logs. Sensor reconstructions. A human dreadnought emerging from void space. Enemy fleets already in formation. Weapons firing first. Always first. Energy beams. Missile storms. Impact after impact. The human ship did not move. Did not evade. Did not respond. At first. Then. It fired. Once. A single focus beam. 6 ships vanished. Not destroyed. Not crippled. Gone. The footage cut. Then resumed. Another engagement. Another fleet. Same result. No chaos. No prolonged battle. Just precision. Efficiency. End. They didn't pursue survivors, the tactical officer murmured. Retiz shook his head slightly. They didn't need to. Another clip appeared. The dreadnought holding position. Silent. Still. As if the battle had never required effort. As if it had already been decided before it began. The recordings ended. The bridge light seemed dimmer now. No one commented. No one questioned. Because the pattern was clear. Human dreadnoughts did not fight wars. They ended them. Retiz turned his attention back to the live feed. The approaching object had grown slightly larger. Still distant. Still slow. Still unhurried. Distance update, he said. 4 hours out of defense range. 4 hours. For something that could erase fleets in minutes. And it wasn't rushing. It wasn't accelerating. It wasn't preparing for battle. That was the part that unsettled him most. Why announce itself? The intelligence officer asked again. Quieter this time. Retiz answered without looking away from the display. Because it doesn't need surprise. Another pulse echoed. Human vessel inbound. The words no longer felt like information. They felt like inevitability. A junior officer shifted nervously. If it's a dreadnought, where's the rest of the fleet? No one answered. Because the question itself revealed the truth. There was no fleet. There didn't need to be. Retiz folded his hands behind his back again. But this time, it wasn't control. It was restraint. Raise system-wide awareness. He ordered. Level. He paused for half a second. Then, condition yellow. Soft alerts began transmitting across the system. Not panic. Not emergency. But readiness. Mining stations slowed operations. Defense fleets adjusted formation. Long-range sensors recalibrated. The system was waking up. Not to a threat, but to a presence. Another pulse. Stronger now. Closer. Human vessel inbound. Retiz watched the words fade. Then return. Then fade again. Each repetition carried less mystery. And more weight. This was not a warning, not a negotiation, not a request. This was information delivered with absolute certainty. A fact, a truth, a decision already made. The human vessel was coming, and nothing in the Velaran expanse had ever faced something like this before. Rhett felt it then. Not fear, not yet, but something close, something unfamiliar, something his people had not felt in a very long time. Uncertainty. He kept his eyes on the approaching void, on the place where nothing should have existed, on the path where something now moved, slow, steady, unstoppable, and for the first time in 300 cycles, the expanse was no longer silent. The bridge lights dimmed slightly as power shifted across the Caliron. Not an emergency, just preparation. But even that small change felt heavier now. Commander Rhett stood in silence, watching the archive combat footage replay on a secondary display. Again and again, each clip different, each outcome the same. They always fired first, the intelligence officer said quietly. Rhett didn't look at him. Yes. And it never mattered. No, it never did. Another recording began. A sci-fi strike fleet, larger than standard formation, closing in on a single human vessel. Weapons fully charged. Tactical advantage confirmed. The log showed confidence. Clear. Absolute. The assumption that numbers meant control. The assumption that power meant victory. The human ship did not move. It did not reposition. It did not react. Until it did. One beam. Clean. Focused. Precise. The front line vanished. The rest of the fleet hesitated. And that hesitation cost them everything. The footage cut. Silence returned. Rhett spoke, almost to himself. We thought they were inefficient. The tactical officer frowned slightly. Commander! They didn't deploy large fleets. Rhett continued. They didn't expand aggressively. They didn't occupy territory the way other empires did. He finally toned. We assumed that meant weakness. No one replied, because they all knew how that assumption ended. We measured strength by size, he said, by numbers, by territory. Another pulse echoed across the bridge. Human vessel inbound. Rethus's voice lowered. They measured it differently. The intelligence officer nodded slowly. Efficiency. Finality. Rhett corrected. Silence. The distinction mattered. Efficiency won battles. Finality ended them. Another report came in from long-range sensors. Commander, mass reading updated. Rhett turned back to the display. Report. The object has increased in clarity. Structural readings confirm layered hull design. Multiple internal compartments. Weapon nodes, numerous. How many? The officer hesitated. We cannot count them all. That wasn't reassuring. Energy output. Still low, less than 20% of estimated capacity. That drew attention. 20%, the tactical officer repeated. Yes. And at that level, the sensor officer glanced at the comparative data. It already matches the combined output of our forward defense fleets. Silence. No one spoke. No one reacted outwardly. But the understanding spread instantly. If that was 20%, then full power. The thought remained unfinished. Rhett didn't need to say it. No one did. Another pulse. Closer now. He could feel it. Not physically, but mentally. Like pressure building behind a closed door. Still no escorts? He asked. None detected. No secondary signals. None. Just one ship. One signal. One message. And yet, it filled the entire system. That is not logical, the tactical officer said. Rhett disagreed. It is perfectly logical if it does not expect resistance. That answer settled heavily, because it wasn't arrogance. It wasn't assumption. It was based on history. The sci-fi had faced humans once. Just once. And that had been enough. Commander, the intelligence officer said carefully, there's something else. Rhett looked at him. Speak. I reviewed human combat doctrine after the war. Continue. They do not escalate immediately. Rhett narrowed his eyes slightly. Explain. They observe first, The officer said. They allow the opposing force to act, to choose. Why? The officer hesitated, then answered, to confirm intent. Another pulse echoed. Human vessel inbound. The meaning shifted again. Not a warning, not a threat, a presence waiting to be acknowledged. Rhett his turned back to the display. If that is true, he said slowly, then this ship is not here to attack. The tactical officer frowned. Then why is it coming? Rhett his didn't answer immediately, because the possibilities were worse. If it were an invasion, he said finally, there would be more ships. Yes. If it were a strike mission, it would not announce itself. Yes. If it intended immediate conflict. He paused. It would already be here. Silence. That was the truth no one wanted to say. The human vessel was not rushing, not hiding, not preparing. It was moving slowly, because it could, because nothing could stop it. Another update appeared. Commander, signal strength increasing. Retters didn't need to ask why. It's closer, he said. Yes. How long now? The officer checked. 3 hours. 3 hours. For something that had already changed the entire system. Without firing a single shot, Retters folded his arms behind his back again. But now, it wasn't for control. It was to keep himself still. Because something else had taken its place. Understanding. Humans did not move without reason. They did not send dreadnoughts for routine patrol. They did not cross into controlled systems without purpose. Which meant this was intentional. Every second of it. Every pulse. Every movement. Every decision already made long before they detected the signal. Another pulse echoed. Stronger. Closer. Human vessel inbound. Retters stared at the words, then spoke quietly. Alert all fleets. The tactical officer straightened. Engagement readiness. Retters paused, then shook his head slightly. No. A brief silence. Then, observation readiness. That confused some of the officers, but not all, because those who remembered, understood, humans did not start wars, but they ended them. And right now, the Valoran expanse stood at the edge of a decision. Not theirs. The human ship had already made its own. The only question left was what they would do when it arrived. Another pulse filled the bridge. Deep, calm, unchanged, but no longer mysterious. Now, it felt like a countdown. The Valoran expanse was no longer quiet. It was listening. Across the system, fleets shifted position in silence. Not aggressively, not defensively, just enough to acknowledge what was coming. Massive sci-fi warships aligned along calculated vectors. Defense platforms activated targeting grids, but held fire. Mining stations reduced operations. Civilian traffic slowed to a near standstill. No one had ordered panic, but everyone felt it. Commander Retters stood at the center of the Caleron Bridge, watching the system-wide tactical display expand before him. Thousands of signals, all stable, all waiting. Update, he said. The sensor officer responded immediately. Object continues on current trajectory. No deviation. No increase in speed. Distance. 2 hours out of defense line. 2 hours. The word settled heavily. 2 hours until contact. And still, no weapons charged. No shields raised. No change in behavior. That was the worst part. It's not reacting to our formations, the tactical officer said. It doesn't need to, Retters replied. Another pulse echoed across the bridge. Stronger now. Closer. Human vessel inbound. This time, it didn't just fill the room. It carried beyond it. Commander, the communications officer said, voice tightening slightly. The signal is now transmitting across multiple bands. How many? All of them. Retters turned slowly. All. Yes, Commander. Military frequencies, civilian channels, deep relay networks. It's not targeting us specifically anymore. Another pulse. Human vessel inbound. It's broadcasting to the entire system, the officer finished. Silence followed, because that changed everything. This was no longer a private detection, no longer a military matter. Now, everyone could hear it. Across mining colonies, workers paused mid-task as a deep pulse rolled through their systems. On cargo vessels drifting between stations, crews looked up from their consoles as the message appeared uninvited on their screens. Even in distant orbital habitats, the signal arrived, unfiltered, unstoppable, calm, certain, present. They want to be seen, the intelligence officer said quietly. Retiz nodded once. They want to be known. Another update flashed across the main display. Commander, visual range approaching. The screen shifted. At first, nothing, just stars. Then, a distortion, a shadow that didn't belong. It was still far, still unclear, but it was there, and it was growing. No one spoke. They didn't need confirmation anymore. The system could feel it. Rhett has studied the shape carefully. Still no acceleration. Still no change in energy output. Still, no urgency. It's not entering like an attacker, the tactical officer said. Rethus's voice was low. No. Another pause. Then, it's entering like it already owns a space. That statement carried across the bridge like a weight, because it wasn't arrogance. It was observation. Another signal pulse. Human vessel inbound. The phrase had changed in meaning again. At first, it was information. Then it was warning. Now, it felt like presence. A declaration that could not be ignored. Commander, the communications officer said suddenly, incoming request from High Command. Retiz didn't look away from the display. Patch it through. The bridge lighting dimmed slightly as a holographic projection formed at the center of the room. 12 figures appeared. The HFY High Council. Their expressions were controlled, but not calm. Commander Retiz, the lead counselor, said, confirm your report. Retiz spoke evenly. Unknown vessel confirmed. Human origin. Dreadnought class configuration highly probable. Murmurs spread across the projection. One counselor leaned forward. Why is it alone? Retiz answered without hesitation. Because it does not need support. Silence followed. Another pulse echoed. Louder. Closer. Human vessel inbound. The council heard it too. For the first time. They experienced it directly. Not as a report. Not as data. But as presence. One of them spoke, voice lower now. We believed human expansion was contained. So did we, Retiz replied. Then why are they here? Retiz didn't answer immediately, because he didn't know. And that was the most dangerous part. Another counselor spoke, sharper this time. Raise full defense readiness. We cannot allow an authorized entry into controlled space. The tactical officer glanced at Retiz. Waiting. Retiz remained still. If we raise shields and lock weapons, he said slowly, we signal threat. And if we do nothing, the counselor challenged. Rethus's eyes remained on the approaching shadow. Then we observe intent. The chamber fell quiet. Another pulse. Human vessel inbound. Closer now. Almost immediate. Retiz continued. If this is an invasion, escalation will follow regardless. And if it is not, another counselor asked. Retiz finally turned slightly. Then we avoid repeating history. That ended the argument, not because it convinced them, but because they remembered. The last war, the cost, the outcome, the realization that had taken decades to accept. Humans did not respond well to fear. They responded to aggression with finality. The lead counselor exhaled slowly. Maintain observation, he said, reluctantly. Do not engage without authorization. Yes, counselor. The projection faded. The bridge returned to its dim, focused state. But the tension remained. Stronger now. Heavier. Because a decision had been made. Not to act. Not yet. And sometimes, waiting was worse than fighting. Commander, the sensor officer said suddenly. Retiz turned. Report. Object entering outer defense range. The display updated. The shadows sharpened. Details beginning to form. Still distant. Still massive. Still unstoppable. Another pulse echoed. But this time, it didn't feel like a message. It felt like arrival. Human vessel inbound. Retiz stared at the screen. 2 hours ago, this system had been predictable. controlled, untouched. Now, everything had changed. Because of one signal, because of one ship, because of one decision made somewhere far beyond their reach. He spoke quietly. Hold all positions. Yes, Commander. No one moved. No one spoke. They simply watched. As the impossible approached. Slow, calm, unavoidable. And for the first time in centuries, the Velaran expanse was not in control. It was waiting. Visual clarity achieved. The words were quiet, but every officer on the bridge heard them. Commander Retis didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. His eyes were already fixed on the main display. Bring it up, he said. The screen shifted. For a moment, nothing changed. Just stars. Then, the darkness moved. Not fast, not sudden, but undeniable. A shadow separated itself from the void, as if space itself had decided to take form. The image sharpened. Edges appeared. Lines. Angles. Mass. And then, the full shape emerged. No one spoke. They couldn't. The human vessel filled the screen, not because it was close, but because it was too large to ignore even at distance. Layered armor plates covered its surface, overlapping like the scales of some ancient, immovable creature. Not smooth like sci-fi ships. Not elegant. Not fast. Heavy. Intentional. Every section of its hull looked built to endure punishment, not avoid it. Weapon emplacements lined its sides. Hundreds. Maybe more. But they were recessed. Hidden within armored recesses. Protected. Waiting. Engine ports glowed faintly at the rear. Deep blue. Steady. Controlled. No flare. No excess. Just quiet power. It doesn't look like a warship, one officer whispered. Retis answered softly. That's because it isn't built for war. A pause. Then, it's built to survive it. Silence. The scale markers updated across the display. Numbers appeared, then recalculated, then adjusted again. That can't be correct, the sensor officer muttered. Say it, Retis said. The officer hesitated, then forced the words out. Length exceeds any known sci-fi capital ship. A pause. Mass equivalent to a fractured moon segment. That did it. The bridge went completely still. Not fear, not panic. Something deeper. Recognition. This wasn't just a ship. This was a statement made of metal and gravity. Energy output. Retis asked. Still below 20%. That answer felt worse now, because they could see it. They could see what 20% looked like, and it was already too much. Another pulse echoed across the bridge. But now, it felt different. Closer. Heavier. Human vessel inbound. The words appeared again. But no one needed them anymore. They were looking directly at it. It's not targeting anything, the tactical officer said. Confirm, Retis ordered. Weapon systems inactive. No targeting locks. No shield escalation. The ship continued forward, slow, measured, unstoppable, and yet it wasn't behaving like a predator. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't threatening. It was arriving. It's not even facing our fleet formations, another officer noted. That was true. Its orientation was slightly angled, not defensive, not offensive, just positioned, as if the fleets didn't matter, as if nothing in the system required its attention. Retis stepped closer to the display. His eyes traced the lines of the vessel, the layered hull, the recessed weapons, the controlled engines. Then, he noticed something. Magnify forward sections. The image zoomed in. More detail, more structure, more intent. Commander, the sensor officer whispered. Retis didn't look at him. I see it. The weapon arrays weren't aligned. They weren't aimed. They weren't even positioned for immediate deployment. They were dormant, protected, inactive. That's not a combat posture, the tactical officer said. No, Retis agreed. Another pause. Then, it's a reserve posture. That was worse, because it meant one thing. The ship did not expect resistance. Another pulse. Stronger, closer, human vessel inbound. The phrase no longer carried information. It carried weight, meaning, presence. A junior officer swallowed. Why would something like that come here alone? No one answered, because the answer was already in front of them. It didn't need anything else. The human vessel slowed slightly, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to signal intent. Velocity decreasing, the sensor officer reported. New course. Retters asked. The display updated. A vector line shifted, not toward the sci-fi fleet, not toward command stations, not toward central infrastructure. Outer mining sector, the officer said. Again, the same region. Retters felt that quiet realization return. Stronger now, focused. It's not here for us, he said. The tactical officer glanced at him. Then what is it here for? Retters didn't answer, because he was starting to understand. And the answer changed everything. Another pulse echoed, but this time, it didn't feel like a warning, or even a statement. It felt like confirmation. The ship had arrived, not aggressively, not defensively, but with purpose already decided. The massive vessel adjusted its position slightly, then held, floating in space like a second moon, silent, immovable, unchallenged, across the system. Every ship, every station, every observer watched. No one fired. No one moved. No one dared. Because the truth had settled into every mind at the same time. This was not a battle. Not yet. This was something else. Something larger. Something controlled. Something deliberate. Commander Retters stood still, staring at the impossible shape before him. For the first time, he understood something clearly. This ship wasn't asking permission to be here. It had already decided. The only question left was what everyone else would do about it. Another pulse rolled through the system. Deep, calm, unavoidable. Human vessel inbound. But now, it wasn't inbound anymore. It was here. The human vessel did not fire. It did not raise shields. It did not even acknowledge the sci-fi fleet surrounding it. It simply moved, slowly, deliberately, adjusting its position with precise, controlled bursts from its engines. Course correction confirmed. The sensor officer reported. Heading. Retters asked. Outer mining sector. Again, not a coincidence, not a drift, a decision. The massive ship glided across the system, ignoring military formations, bypassing defense platforms, passing through calculated firing zones without hesitation. And still, no weapons activated, no targeting locks engaged, no communication beyond the signal. Another pulse echoed, closer now, heavier, human vessel inbound. But this time, it didn't feel like an announcement. It felt like confirmation of presence. They are not reacting to us at all, the tactical officer said. Retters nodded slightly, because we are not their focus. That realization spread across the bridge like cold air. Everything the sci-fi had prepared, every fleet, every weapon, every strategy, was irrelevant. The human vessel reached the outer mining sector. Then, it slowed, gradually, smoothly, until it stopped, not abruptly, not defensively, just perfectly positioned, floating above a region of space that had not mattered in decades. Whole position confirmed, the sensor officer said quietly. Retters stepped forward. Magnify that sector. The display zoomed in. Old mining structures drifted across the screen. Inactive platforms, abandoned stations, remnants of operations long completed and forgotten. Nothing valuable remained. Nothing strategic. Nothing worth this. Why here? Someone whispered. Retters didn't answer, because the answer hadn't revealed itself yet. Then, Commander! The sharp tone broke the silence. Retters turned. Report. Object deploying external units. The display shifted again. Small shapes began emerging from the underside of the human vessel. Dozens, then hundreds. They spread outward in controlled patterns. Uniform spacing. Perfect alignment. Missiles, the tactical officer asked. The sensor officer shook his head. Negative. Then what are they? The data updated. Energy signatures appeared. Weak at first, then stabilizing. Defensive constructs, the officer said. Clarify. Shield emitters. Silence. Everyone watched as the small units moved into position, expanding outward, forming a grid, a precise, calculated, expanding grid. "They are building a barrier," someone said. Rethus's eyes narrowed slightly. "Not a barrier." The grid locked into place. Energy pulsed between nodes. A faint shimmer appeared, barely visible, but unmistakable. A shield, wide, stable, covering the entire sector. A perimeter, Rethus finished. Another pulse echoed. But now, it felt different. Human vessel inbound. No, that wasn't right anymore. The meaning had changed. The words stayed the same, but the intent had shifted. "They are not preparing for attack," the intelligence officer said slowly. "They are establishing control." Rethus shook his head. "No." A pause. Then, "They are establishing protection." That word settled heavily, because it didn't fit. Not with the size of the ship. Not with the history of dreadnoughts. Not with the fear they inspired. Protection? From what? "Commander," the sensor officer said, voice tightening slightly. "The shield strength is increasing." "How strong?" The officer hesitated. "Equivalent to fleet-level defensive output." Murmurs spread across the bridge. They had built a defensive network. In minutes, inside sci-fi-controlled space. Without permission. Without resistance. Without even acknowledging the fleets watching them. "They are claiming territory," the tactical officer said. Rethus remained still. "No." Another pause. "They are not claiming it." He looked at the display, at the shield, at the silent, massive ship above it. "They are restoring it." That confused several officers. "Restoring what?" one asked. Rethus didn't answer, because he was remembering. Old records, old reports, fragments of history that had been filed away as irrelevant. A human colony, destroyed, decades ago, evacuated, or so they believed. The human vessel adjusted slightly, lowering its position, aligning perfectly with the shield grid, like a guardian taking position above something valuable, something worth protecting. Another pulse echoed, but this time, it didn't feel like an announcement. It felt like a message finally understood. The ship had not come to threaten. It had not come to conquer. It had come, with purpose, with certainty, with patience, to do something already decided long before arrival. "Commander," the sensor officer whispered. Rethus turned slightly. "Yes." "If they are protecting something." A pause. "What is inside that sector?" Silence, because no one had looked. Not deeply, not carefully, not in decades. The sci-fi had taken the territory, extracted its resources, moved on. They had assumed. Nothing remained. Rethus stared at the shield grid, at the silent, unmoving dreadnought above it, at the precision, the control, the lack of aggression, and he understood something in that moment, something that shifted everything. "This isn't a military action," he said quietly. The tactical officer frowned. "Then what is it?" Rethus's voice lowered. "It's a return." Another pulse rolled through the system. Deep, calm, certain. But now, it carried a meaning none of them had expected. Not invasion, not warning, not threat. A presence, a purpose, a line drawn in space. And for the first time, the sci-fi realized something terrifying. This ship was not here to fight them. It was here to do something else. Something they had not prepared for. Something they did not understand yet. And that was far more dangerous. The system did not stay calm for long. It never did. Not when pride was involved. "Commander," the sensor officer said sharply, "one of our patrol ships is breaking formation." Rethus didn't turn immediately. He already knew what that meant. Identify. Destroyer-class vessel. Captain Verex commanding. Of course. Young. Decorated. Unproven in real war. Open channel. Rethus ordered. The display shifted. A sci-fi captain appeared. Sharp features. Rigid posture. Eyes burning with restrained anger. "Captain Verex," Rethus said calmly. "Return to formation immediately." "With respect, Commander," Verex replied. "They are constructing defenses inside our territory." "I am aware." "Then we cannot allow this." You are not authorized to engage. I am not engaging, Varric said quickly. I am demonstrating presence. Rethus's voice hardened slightly. You will stand down. A pause. For a moment, it seemed the captain might obey. Then, his image flickered as the ship accelerated. Captain, Rethus began. Too late. The destroyer surged forward, engines flaring, cutting across formation lines toward the shield grid. On the Caleron bridge, silence. Everyone watched, because they all knew this was how war started. Not with strategy, with ego, distance. Rethus asked, closing rapidly. Human vessel response. None. The Dreadnought did not move, did not rotate, did not react. It simply remained, above the shield grid, watching. The sci-fi destroyer slowed as it approached the perimeter. Weapons powered. Not fully, but enough. Open broadcast channel. Varric's voice echoed across the system. Human vessel, he said, sharp and controlled. You are operating within sci-fi-controlled territory. Withdraw immediately. Silence. No response. The Dreadnought remained still, unmoved, unimpressed. Commander, the tactical officer whispered. They're ignoring him. Rethus didn't answer, because that was expected. Humans did not respond to noise. They responded to action. Captain Varric, Rethus said again, stand down. No reply. On the display, the destroyer's weapons charged slightly higher. A warning threshold. Not lethal. Not yet. Do not do this, Rethus murmured. But space does not wait for hesitation. The first shot fired. A small plasma burst streaked forward, striking the outer edge of the shield grid. A brief flash. The shield rippled, then stabilized. No damage. No change. The Dreadnought did nothing. Impact absorbed. The sensor officer reported. Human response. None. The bridge went still. For one moment, it seemed like nothing would happen, like the action had gone unnoticed, like the human vessel did not care. Then, the transmission came. Across every channel. Clear. Calm. Controlled. Warning shot received. The voice was human. Deep. Measured. Unemotional. No anger. No urgency. Just acknowledgement. A pause followed. Then, do not repeat. Silence. That was it. No threat. No escalation. Just a boundary. On the Caleron bridge, every officer felt it. That line. Invisible, but absolute. Captain Varric, Rethus said sharply, disengage immediately. But pride is louder than reason. And faster. The destroyer's weapons charged again. Higher this time. Brighter. Commander, the sensor officer began. The second shot fired. Stronger. Faster. It struck the shield grid. Again. This time, the ripple was larger. But still, no damage. And then, everything changed. Energy spike. The sensor officer shouted. The human Dreadnought shifted. Not physically, not positionally, but internally. Power surged. Not to full. Not even close. But enough. Weapon systems activated. Not firing. Targeting. Across the entire system. Alarms ignited. Commander, the tactical officer's voice broke. They've locked everything. The display flooded with indicators. Thousands. Every sci-fi ship. Every station. Every defense platform. All targeted. Simultaneously. Perfectly. No delay. No error. Every weak point calculated. Every trajectory mapped. Every outcome predicted. All by one ship. One. Rethus felt it then. Not fear. Understanding. This was what the old records had tried to explain. This was what words had failed to capture. Precision. Control. Finality. The human voice returned. Calm. Unchanged. Second warning acknowledged. A pause. Then, do not test a third. Silence. Total. Absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. Because everyone understood. The Dreadnought had not fired. It had not attacked. But it had shown everything. What it could do. How fast. How easily. and most importantly, that it had chosen not to. Captain Verex read his it quietly, power down. On the display, the destroyer hesitated. Then, its weapons dimmed, engines reduced. Slowly, it backed away from the shield perimeter. The moment it did, the targeting locks vanished. Instantly, as if they had never been there, the Dreadnought powered down, returning to its previous state. Calm, still, silent. On the bridge, no one breathed for several seconds. Then, air returned. Slowly, carefully, Retis closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. They didn't fire, one officer whispered. No, Retis said. Another pause. Then, they didn't need to. Across the system, the message was clear, not because it was spoken, but because it had been demonstrated. The human vessel did not want conflict, but it was fully prepared for it, and if pushed, it would not hesitate. Another pulse echoed across the system. But now, the meaning had changed again. Not inbound, not warning, not arrival. Something else. Something heavier. Something final. The human ship remained above the shield grid, unmoving, unchallenged, unquestioned, and every ship in the Velaran expanse understood the truth. The line had been drawn, and it would not be crossed again. The system did not move for a long time. No ships advanced. No weapons charged. No orders were given. For the first time in centuries, the Velaran expanse was not deciding anything. It was watching. The human dreadnought remained exactly where it had stopped, above the shield grid, silent, unmoving, but no longer unknown. Commander Retis stood alone near the forward viewing glass. Behind him, the bridge worked in quiet, controlled motion. No panic, no chaos, just awareness. Commander, the intelligence officer said softly as he approached. We found something. Retis didn't turn. Report. We began scanning the protected sector at deeper levels. Subsurface, long-range resonance, structural mapping. A pause. Then, there are life signatures. Rethus's eyes didn't move. Confirm. They are faint, low energy, but consistent. How many? Unknown. The readings are scattered. Underground. Underground. That word settled slowly. Heavy. What kind of structures? Retis asked. Artificial. The officer replied. Organized. Not natural formations. Retis finally turned. How long? The officer hesitated, then answered. Decades, at least. Silence. The pieces aligned. Not instantly, but inevitably. The colony, Retis said quietly. The officer nodded. The one recorded as destroyed. Evacuated. Retis corrected automatically. Another pause. Then, assumed evacuated. That single correction changed everything. Retis turned back toward the display, toward the shield grid, toward the silent giant above it. They were still there, he said. Not a question, a realization. They survived, the officer confirmed. How? Unknown. Why were we never aware? The officer didn't answer immediately, because the answer was uncomfortable. We never looked, he said finally. That truth settled deeper than anything else. The sci-fi had claimed the territory, extracted its resources, established control, and moved on. They had assumed the past was finished. Assumed nothing remained. Assumed wrong. Retis watched as the human dreadnought shifted slightly in orbit. Subtle, precise. Then, its lower hull opened. Small vessels emerged. Not fighters, not weapons. Transports. Unarmed, slow, deliberate. Shuttles deployed. The sensor officer reported. Configuration. Retis asked. Medical units, engineering teams. A pause. Recovery operations. The meaning hit instantly. They are not here to fight, one officer whispered. Retis shook his head. No. Another pause. Then, they are here to finish something. The display zoomed closer, through the shield grid, toward the surface below. The old mining world. Scarred, broken, forgotten. Until now, dust-covered structures, collapsed towers, ruined installations. But beneath, movement, lights, faint, flickering, returning. The human shuttles descended, carefully, gently, touching down on ground untouched for decades. Doors opened. Figures stepped out, armored at first. Then, others, unarmored, medical teams, engineers. And then, something no one expected. A structure shifted on the surface. Slowly, as if waking, a sealed hatch opened from beneath the planet itself. And from the darkness, they emerged. Humans, older, weaker, but alive. The bridge fell completely silent. No orders, no reports. Just watching. One figure stepped forward. A child, small, unsteady. She looked up, toward the sky, toward the massive ship hanging above her world. Her voice, faint but captured by long-range audio, echoed across the bridge. They came back. No one spoke, because nothing needed to be said. The truth was already there. Humans had not forgotten. Not the colony, not the people, not the past. Even after decades, even after war, even after loss, they had returned. Not with an army, not with anger, but with certainty. Retis felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not uncertainty. Something else. Something unfamiliar. Respect. Commander, the intelligence officer said quietly, "There's more." Retis turned slightly. "Yes." External threat detected. The display shifted outward. New signals appeared. Multiple ships. Fast. Aggressive. Raiders. They had seen the tension, the hesitation, the distraction, and they saw opportunity. "They are moving toward the mining world," the tactical officer said. Retis didn't respond. He didn't need to, because the human Dreadnought already had. Its engines flared. Not fully, but enough. Power surged. The shield grid intensified. Weapon ports opened. For the first time. Energy levels rising. The sensor officer began. "Not full output," Retis said, "but close." The raider ships didn't stop, didn't hesitate. They pressed forward. Then, the human voice returned, across every channel. "Calm, unchanged. You are entering a protected zone." No response. The raiders accelerated. The Dreadnought fired. Not a beam, not a blast. Precision. 3 ships vanished instantly. No delay, no wasted motion. The rest broke formation. Too late. Within moments, they were gone, destroyed, or fleeing beyond sensor range. The Dreadnought powered down, immediately, returning to stillness. Calm, controlled, like nothing had happened. On the surface below, the survivors never stopped moving, never panicked, never feared, because for them, the battle had already been won. The moment the signal was heard, they came back. Retis closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "They protected our system," one officer whispered. Retis shook his head slightly. "No." A pause. "They protected their people." Another pause. Then, and anyone near them. That was the difference. That was the truth. The human ship had not come to conquer, not to reclaim territory, not to punish. It had come to keep a promise. The signal echoed again across the system. But now, the words had changed. Human vessel present. Protection active. No one panicked this time. No one prepared for war. Because now, they understood. Retis looked out at the massive ship above the world. Silent, steady, unmoving. Not as a threat, not as an invader, but as something else. Something far more powerful. A guardian. He spoke quietly. To send something like that for a few survivors. The intelligence officer corrected him softly. Not a few. Retis glanced at him. Their people. A long silence followed. Then, Retis nodded once. Across the system, ships slowly powered down weapons. Fleets relaxed formation. Not out of weakness, but out of understanding. The line had been drawn. Not against them, but against harm. And no one wanted to cross it again. Retis looked at the stars beyond the Dreadnought, then back at the world below, at the lights returning, at the lives continuing, at the promise fulfilled. And he understood something that no report could explain. Power was not in destruction, not in fear, not in control. Power was in what you chose to protect. The signal echoed one last time. Steady, calm, certain, human vessel present. And this time, no one questioned it, because now they knew what it meant.